The air in the room is thick, smelling of stale coffee and grief and old money. It sits heavy, a physical weight pressing down on shoulders already hunched with sorrow. My husband, David, shifts in his seat beside me, a nervous tremor in his leg bouncing against mine. He keeps clearing his throat, a small, irritating sound in the quiet. Across the polished mahogany table sits Mr. Abernathy, the family lawyer, his face a mask of professional solemnity, the thick document resting before him like a final judgment. My parents are gone. Both of them, within weeks of each other. A sudden, brutal efficiency to the end that still feels unreal. And now, the reading of the will. It feels crass, a financial footnote to lives lived fully and generously. But here we are. Abernathy clears his throat, unfolding the first page. He reads the formal language, the preamble, the standard clauses. David leans forward, his eyes fixed on the document. I watch him. His usual easy smile is gone, replaced by a look of tense anticipation. He worked so hard for this moment, harder than I ever knew. Abernathy drones on, listing assets, properties, investments, accounts. Significant assets. My parents built a life, a legacy. They wanted to share it. They always said that. With me. With my family. With David, who they welcomed like a son. Abernathy turns a page. The air shifts. He reads a specific clause. His voice remains level, but the words hit like stones. Something about beneficiaries. Something about conditions. Something about exclusion. David stops bouncing his leg. He sits utterly still. Abernathy reads my name. My full name. He reads about a trust, set up for my sole benefit. He reads about properties, bequeathed directly to me. He reads about accounts, signed over with immediate effect. Everything. It's all for me. Explicitly. Unequivocally. David's breath hisses in. Abernathy continues, his voice steady, reading the part that follows. The exclusion clause. He reads David's name. And then he reads the reasons. Specific reasons. Stated clearly. Things my parents believed. Things that were lies. Lies about me. Lies David told them. He reads about perceived irresponsibility, about alleged neglect, about supposed manipulative behavior. The very things David spent years carefully planting in their minds. He reads that, based on these grave concerns for their daughter's well-being and future, and the perceived threat posed by certain influences Abernathy's steady gaze directs subtly towards David. They have made the difficult decision to ensure their daughter's inheritance is protected from those influences. Therefore, David is explicitly and irrevocably excluded from any claim on their estate, in any form, forever. Silence descends, heavy and absolute. Abernathy folds the document slowly. He looks at David. David's face is pale, then it flushes a dark, angry red. His eyes, when they flick to mine, are not the eyes of a loving husband. They are the eyes of an animal caught in a trap. His jaw clenches. And then the sound starts. Low at first, a rumbling in his chest. It builds. It claws its way up his throat. And then he screams. He screams a guttural, raw sound of disbelief, of fury, of utter, blinding rage. He slams his fist on the table, the heavy wood groaning in protest. Abernathy recoils slightly, but remains impassive. David screams again, words tumbling out now. Accusations, denials, obscenities. He screams at Abernathy, at the will, at the memory of my parents, at me. He screams that it's not fair, that it's a mistake, that I manipulated them, that I lied. The sound is ugly, terrifying. I sit there, watching him. The grief is still a stone in my chest, but something else is there now. A cold, quiet calm. I watch the man I married unravel, stripped bare by the truth of his own making. He screams about being left with nothing. He doesn't understand. He didn't just get left with nothing financially. He got left with himself. And I watch as he finally sees what that means. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. If you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Life before David felt complete. Not perfect, but whole. I had my parents, a warm, steady presence in my world. They were successful, yes, but more than that, they were kind, generous. Our home was full of laughter, of shared meals, of a quiet understanding that flowed between us, like a gentle current. I was their only child. They adored me. I adored them. We had a rhythm, a closeness that felt unbreakable. I had my work, a small, satisfying career that paid the bills and felt meaningful. I had friends. I had independence. I didn't need anything, not really. But I wanted love. And then there was David. He walked into my life like a splash of color on a gray day. Charismatic, charming, full of grand plans and sweeping gestures.
He saw me, he said. He understood me.
He made me laugh. He swept me off my feet, as the saying goes. My parents liked him. They saw his potential, his drive. They saw how happy he made me. He fit into our world seamlessly, or so it seemed. Family dinners, holidays, quiet weekends at their lake house. He was attentive to them, listening to their stories, asking for their advice. He was the perfect son-in-law. Almost too perfect, looking back. We married. A beautiful wedding my parents insisted on helping with, showering us with their generosity. We bought a house, started building a life. On the surface, it was everything I thought I wanted. David's career took off, just as he predicted. He was good at making money, good at networking, good at presenting a polished, successful image to the world. But slowly, subtly, things began to shift. It started small. He'd express mild disapproval of my friends, finding them too loud, too negative. I spent less time with them. He'd suggest my job wasn't challenging enough for someone of my potential. I started thinking about changing careers. He'd comment on my spending habits, even though I was using my own money. I became more careful, more hesitant to buy anything frivolous. He was shaping my world, molding it to his liking, and I didn't even realize it was happening. I thought it was just compromise. The little adjustments you make in a marriage. The shift with my parents was even more insidious. It didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, steady erosion. It started with David volunteering to be the primary point of contact with them for certain things. Managing the logistics of family visits, handling communication about their health or finances. He was just trying to be helpful, he said. Taking things off my plate so I wouldn't be stressed. I was grateful. He had more time, a more flexible schedule than I did back then. It made sense. Then, he'd relay messages that felt slightly off. Mom said she's worried about your stress levels, he'd say, adding a comment about my work being too demanding. Or, Dad asked if we're having trouble making ends meet. You spent a lot on that new coat. It felt like concerned questions, but they always left me feeling slightly defensive, slightly inadequate. I'd call my parents to clarify, and they'd be vague, saying something like, "Oh, we just want you to be happy, dear," or "David mentioned he was concerned, that's all." The first real crack appeared during a difficult period at my work. I was stressed, exhausted. I leaned on David. He was supportive, outwardly. He'd listen, he'd offer advice. But when he talked to my parents, his tone shifted. He'd paint a picture of me falling apart, unable to cope, making rash decisions. He'd express deep concern for my well-being, framed in a way that suggested I was unstable, unreliable. My parents started calling me less often. When they did, the conversations felt stilted. They'd ask probing questions, veiled in concern, that echoed David's narratives. "Are you sure you're handling things okay, sweetie? David says you seem very fragile lately." I'd try to reassure them, but I could feel their distance. It was like there was a wall between us, built brick by painstaking brick. I started trying harder. I'd call them every day. I'd visit more often. I'd bring gifts, offer help. But the warmth was gone, replaced by a polite, cautious formality. My mother's eyes held a hint of sadness, my father's a sort of wary disappointment. It was devastating. The foundation of my life felt like it was crumbling. My attempts to fix it only seemed to make it worse. They'd interpret my efforts through the lens David had created, as desperate, manipulative, or just further proof I wasn't handling things well. David says you were very agitated when you called last night, my mother said once, her voice soft, regretful. I hadn't been agitated. I'd been upset, trying to explain a misunderstanding. But David had apparently called her right after, framing my perfectly normal emotional response as something worrying. The lies escalated. They became more specific, more damaging. David started telling my parents I had developed a problem with alcohol, that I was becoming financially irresponsible, that I was neglecting my health. These were complete fabrications. Horrible, vicious lies designed to paint me as unfit, unstable, incapable. He even hinted, subtly at first, then more explicitly, that I was somehow taking advantage of them, that I was only interested in their money. The man who managed their calls, who handled their logistics, who offered to oversee their affairs, was simultaneously telling them I was a greedy, unreliable mess. I couldn't understand why my parents were believing him. Why wouldn't they trust me? Their daughter? The person they had raised, who had always been open and honest with them. The pain was immense. It was like a physical ache in my chest. I felt betrayed, not just by David, but by my parents' apparent lack of faith in me. My marriage became a minefield. I knew something was terribly wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint the scale of David's deception. When I confronted him about the things my parents were saying, he'd turn it around. He'd accuse me of being paranoid, of imagining things, of misinterpreting his concern. He'd say I was the one driving a wedge between me and my parents with my erratic behavior. Gaslighting. I know the word now, but then I just felt confused, hurt, and increasingly isolated. He was my husband, my partner. Why would he do this? Why would he lie? What was the point? The financial motive was a slow dawning. My parents, particularly my father, were meticulous about their finances. David, with his keen business sense, often discussed investments and estate planning with him. My father valued David's opinion. They had always been open about their intentions. Everything would go to me, their only child. It wasn't a secret. It was the plan. I started noticing David's questions about their assets becoming more pointed. He'd ask about specific accounts, about the value of certain properties. He'd talk about tax implications, about the best ways to manage wealth. He framed it as prudent planning, helping my father ensure everything was in order. And my father, trusting David, discussed it freely. The pieces began to fit together, sickeningly. The isolation, the lies about my character, the increased interest in their finances. It wasn't just about control. It was about money. He wasn't just damaging my relationship with my parents. He was systematically dismantling it, hoping to convince them that I was incapable of managing their legacy, that someone else, someone responsible like him, should step in. He wanted to position himself as the stable, reliable figure, the one who could protect their assets from their unstable daughter. He was playing a long game, a cruel, calculated maneuver to redirect their wealth towards himself. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate, malicious campaign. The man I loved, the man I married, was actively trying to destroy my relationship with my parents and steal my inheritance. The depth of the betrayal was staggering. It hollowed me out. My parents continued to pull away. Our calls became less frequent, our visits strained. They stopped inviting us for holidays, citing vague health concerns or prior commitments. I was devastated. My family, my anchor, was drifting away, and I was powerless to stop it. David offered false sympathy, shaking his head and sighing about how difficult I was making things for everyone. He was the picture of supportive patience, the long-suffering husband dealing with his troubled wife and her exasperated parents. He played the role beautifully. I was losing everything. My connection to my parents, the trust in my marriage, my sense of reality. Was I going crazy? Was I somehow causing this? The gaslighting was effective. Doubt began to creep in, poisoning my own mind. Maybe I was difficult. Maybe I was causing them stress. Maybe I wasn't handling my life well. Then a small, careless mistake by David. He was rushing, getting ready for a business trip. He left his laptop open, an email partially visible on the screen. It was an email to a friend, complaining about my parents being stubborn, about how hard it was to manage them and convince them. The words were casual, dismissive, but the intent was chillingly clear. He wasn't managing them for their benefit or mine. He was managing them for his. He mentioned accelerating the timeline and handling the final details. It was just a few lines, but it was enough. It was proof. Proof of his manipulation of his plan. My hands trembled as I read it. The confusion and doubt vanished, replaced by a searing, cold clarity. He wasn't just lying, he was actively working against me. The pain was still there, a deep, throbbing wound, but now it was joined by a fierce, protective instinct. Protect myself. Protect my parents, even from the distance he had created. I closed the laptop, my heart hammering. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I knew confronting him directly would lead to more lies, more gaslighting, more denial. He was too good at it. I needed proof that he couldn't talk his way out of. I needed to understand the extent of his lies and find a way to expose them. My focus shifted entirely. I stopped trying to fix the relationship with my parents through emotional appeals. It was clear that emotional appeals were what David was using to manipulate them. I needed facts. I needed evidence. I started my own secret investigation. It felt strange, like I was a spy in my own life. I went through David's things when he was out, looking for clues. Bank statements, emails, phone records. It was difficult, sickening work, wading through the detritus of his deceit. I found more emails, carefully worded communications with my parents, subtly twisting my words, misrepresenting my actions, painting me as irresponsible, emotionally unstable, a potential threat to their peace of mind and their assets. I found notes he'd made, almost like a strategic plan. Points to emphasize with my mother, triggers to pull with my father. It was methodical, chillingly precise. He had studied them, studied their vulnerabilities, and used them against them, using his position of trust to poison their minds. The lies were specific. He told my father I was spending money recklessly, running up debts, even though I was living frugally. He told my mother I was emotionally unstable, prone to dramatic outbursts and irrational decisions, even though I was quietly miserable, trying to understand why she was distant. He even hinted at substance abuse problems, a cruel, baseless accusation designed to shock and alarm them. He was setting me up to look like a liability, someone who couldn't be trusted with a significant inheritance. He wanted them to believe he was the only stable, responsible person in my life, the only one capable of managing their wealth wisely. He was aiming for them to change their will, to leave everything to him, or at least to a trust controlled by him, ostensibly for my benefit but effectively under his control. As I pieced together the extent of his deception, a cold anger settled deep within me. It wasn't the hot, explosive anger I'd expected. It was quiet, steady, and utterly resolute. He had tried to steal my future, my relationship with my parents, and my peace of mind. He had used their love for me against them, weaponizing their concern into distrust. I needed to act. But how? Confronting him was useless. Trying to convince my parents directly felt impossible. The wall he had built was too high, too strong. I realized I couldn't fight his lies with my truth directly. I had to use his own methods, his own lies, against him. My parents' health began to fail. First my mother, a swift, cruel illness. Then my father, his heart giving out shortly after hers, unable to bear the loss. The grief was overwhelming. In the midst of it, David was there, playing the part of the supportive husband, the grieving son-in-law. He handled the funeral arrangements, dealt with the practicalities, presented a face of deep sorrow to the world. I watched him, a knot of icy revulsion in my stomach. He mourned the loss of the wealth, not the people. During this time, while he was preoccupied with the performance of grief and the anticipation of his payday, I made my moves.
Quietly, strategically.
I couldn't give my parents the full, ugly truth about David while they were ill and grieving. It would have been too cruel, but I could plant seeds. Small, Carefully chosen seeds of doubt about the narrative David had so carefully constructed. I started small. A seemingly accidental forwarding of an old email chain between my mother and me, discussing my financial prudence years ago, contradicting his claims of reckless spending. A casual mention to a family friend, who I knew would talk to my parents, about how strange it was that David insisted on handling all communications, how I sometimes felt cut off. Subtle things, designed not to accuse David directly, but to create tiny cracks in the perfect facade he presented. I knew my parents. They were intelligent, sharp people. They valued integrity. While David had managed to manipulate them for a time, they weren't fools. The constant barrage of negative information about me, always delivered through David, always just out of my reach to fully refute, must have felt strange to them on some level. Their sudden, severe distrust of their only child must have weighed on them. Perhaps they had already started to question things themselves. Perhaps the sheer negativity David constantly fed them about me, their cherished daughter, eventually triggered their inherent skepticism. They knew my heart. They knew my history. Maybe, deep down, they started to see the inconsistencies in the narrative he was presenting. I couldn't be sure, but I had to hope. I continued gathering information, not just about his lies, but about his activities. I found evidence of him setting up shell companies, of exploring offshore accounts, of researching ways to quickly access and transfer funds from an estate. He wasn't just planning to inherit. He was planning to disappear the money, to make it vanish before I even knew what was happening. He wasn't just a liar. He was a thief. I took the most damning evidence, the notes outlining his plan, the emails detailing his lies, the information about his financial maneuvering, to Mr. Abernathy. Not the family friend Abernathy knew David was manipulating. A different Abernathy. A discreet, highly recommended estate lawyer I found through my own network. I laid it all out. The years of subtle gaslighting, the calculated destruction of my relationship with my parents, the clear financial motive, the evidence of his planned theft. Abernathy listened, his face unreadable. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke. He confirmed that my parents had indeed contacted him some time ago, expressing concerns about my well-being and, crucially, about the information they were receiving about me. They had been considering changes to their will based on this information. But, Abernathy added, they had also expressed a degree of confusion. The person David described didn't align with the daughter they knew. They had asked Abernathy to look into some things, discreetly. It seemed my small, desperate attempts to plant seeds of doubt, combined with David's increasing intensity and perhaps an inherent contradiction in his portrayal of me, had worked. My parents, in their last months, had started to see a flicker of the truth. Armed with the information I provided, Abernathy was able to confirm their suspicions. He didn't tell me the details, bound by client confidentiality, but he indicated that my parents had uncovered enough on their own, or through his discreet inquiries, to realize they had been manipulated. Horribly so. Abernathy confirmed that they had called him back, not to change the will in David's favor, but drastically in the opposite direction. They worked with Abernathy to redraft their will. They ensured I was fully protected, that the assets were placed beyond David's reach. And in a final deliberate act, they included the specific clause detailing their reasons for excluding David, referencing the very lies he had told them about me. They wanted the truth to be known. They wanted him to know they saw through him. They wanted him to know that his betrayal had not only failed, but had backfired spectacularly. They were protecting me, yes, but they were also delivering justice. Using his own weapon against him. The lies he told to disinherit me became the legal, documented reason he was disinherited. It wasn't just karma. It was a perfectly executed, posthumous counterattack orchestrated by the people he thought he had fooled, facilitated by the daughter he thought he had neutralized. So, as David screams across the polished table in Abernathy's office, his face contorted in rage and disbelief, I don't feel triumph. I feel a chilling validation. He thought he was so smart, so strategic. He thought he had won. He thought he had poisoned the well so thoroughly that my parents would see me as toxic and turn to him as the antidote. But he underestimated their love for me. He underestimated their intelligence. And he fatally underestimated the quiet strength it took to watch him, to gather proof, to understand the game he was playing, and to wait. To wait for the moment when his carefully constructed world would collapse around him. He screams about injustice. He screams about being robbed. He screams that I planned this.
And he's right.
I planned to survive him. I planned to expose him. I planned to ensure his lies didn't win. But I didn't manipulate the will. My parents did. They saw his true nature, and they acted to protect their daughter. They used his own malice as the hammer to strike him down. The screaming continues, echoing in the quiet room. Abernathy waits patiently. I watch David, the man who shared my bed, my home, my life, reduced to this raw, ugly display. The charisma is gone. The charm is gone. All that's left is the bitter, desperate core of a greedy, defeated man. He shouts my name, his voice hoarse. You did this. I look at him, my expression calm. The grief for my parents is still a raw wound, but the pain of his betrayal has been cauterized by the cold fire of justice. No, David, I say softly, my voice barely above a whisper, cutting through his rage like ice. You did this. You told them who you were. His face freezes. The screaming stops abruptly, replaced by a stunned, horrifying silence. He looks at me, then at Abernathy, then back at the will lying on the table.
He understands.
The specific wording, the referenced reasons. His own words, weaponized against him by the people he thought he had fooled. He didn't just get left with nothing. He got left with the irrefutable proof, documented for all time in a legal will, that his own lies were his undoing. That his elaborate scheme had been seen, understood, and countered by the very people he sought to exploit. He is not just disinherited, he is exposed. His reputation, the carefully crafted image he presented to the world, that too is stripped away for anyone who reads that document. He is left with the wreckage of his own making. The aftermath is messy, as expected. David's rage doesn't subside quickly. There are threats, legal challenges that go nowhere, desperate attempts to salvage something from the ruins. But the will is ironclad. My parents, guided by Abernathy and their own late-stage realization, had made sure of that. The evidence I provided, combined with whatever they discovered, was damning. The marriage ends, of course. There's no coming back from this. The man I married never existed. He was a construct, a performance designed to gain access to my life and my potential inheritance. The divorce is swift, brutal, and one-sided. Without the financial leverage he expected, stripped of his carefully guarded secrets, David is vulnerable. He tries to fight, but he has nothing to fight with. His lies are documented. His intentions are clear. I am left with my grief, deep and complex. I mourn my parents, their love, their presence in my life. I mourn the years of distance, the painful wall David built between us. I will always wonder how long they knew, how much pain his lies caused them, how they felt realizing their son-in-law was a predator. But I also carry a profound sense of peace. They knew the truth in the end. They believed me.
They protected me.
Their final act was one of unwavering love and profound justice. The inheritance is more than money and property. It is a tangible expression of their trust, their belief in me, their repudiation of David's false narrative. It is vindication. It is the quiet knowledge that their love was stronger than his greed. Rebuilding takes time. The betrayal leaves scars. Trust is a fragile thing, easily broken. But I am not broken. I am stronger. I learned a difficult, painful lesson about the masks people wear, about the hidden motives that can drive those closest to you. I learned that sometimes, the most powerful response to deceit isn't confrontation, but quiet observation, gathering proof, and allowing the truth, when it finally emerges, to speak for itself. David is gone from my life. A toxic chapter closed. His screaming in Abernathy's office is the last sound I associate with him. The sound of a man confronting the consequences of his own choices, the architect of his own ruin. He wanted everything, and in the end, he lost it all, including the carefully constructed illusion of himself. My parents' legacy is secure, and it is mine. Not just the financial security, but the deeper legacy of their love, their wisdom, and their final, powerful act of faith in their daughter. I carry that forward. I live my life, built on a foundation of honesty and resilience, honoring their memory. The house they left me feels not just like a home, but a sanctuary, a testament to a love that saw through lies and ensured that justice, in its own quiet, devastating way, prevailed. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.